This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. Boring. Boring.
Okay, you got it work. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. That's exactly what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Good day to you, wherever you are, however you're watching. I'm Lembit Öpik. This is Lembit Öpik Live on Unprecedented TV, where we find the facts, kill the spin, and tell it like it is, as best we can. Sure, we do express our opinions, but we don't mix them up with facts. That's our goal. That's our mission here at Unprecedented. So glad that you can join us, or if you're watching on the archive, so glad you're going to compare the predictions we make on our show with what actually happened in history. Coming up today, we're going to be talking about a very strange development, but not that surprising. David Lammy. Oh, yes, the Deputy Prime Minister, the man who proves that you don't have to be a genius to make it in politics, has managed to queer the pitch a little bit for his boss, Keir Starmer, after having said that they weren't going to play the man, they'd play the ball, which is a way of saying we're sticking to the politics rather than getting personal. He managed to lob in a quote, which we will play later on, where he accuses Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, of flirting with Hitler Youth. Yes, my friends, you heard it right. Flirting with Hitler Youth, which I believe probably got shut down around 1945. But oh no, David Lammy, after having said it was all professional and all about the politics, he decided he could actually say something like that. This, of course, has caused a flurry of objections and a very strong response from Reform UK itself, which accuses David Lammy of potentially inciting hatred and violence against activists in Reform. Well, David Lammy, after resisting for a few hours, eventually kind of backtracked on roughly the same timetable as Lucy Connolly did. Do you remember her? She was the woman who spent over a year in prison for hurty words on the internet. She also retracted, as far as I know, fairly unilaterally and without pressure from the international and national media, but it was too late. She ended up being behind bars. Now, here's the question. Why isn't David Lammy being arrested? Is it the case that there's one rule for one and one rule for another? Or is accusing one of your political opponents, or as Keir Starmer likes to call them, enemies, of flirting with Hitler Youth quite a few decades after the end of World War II, something different? Apparently, well, at the moment, David Lammy doesn't seem to think there was anything wrong with saying it. I do. Here's my opinion before we bring my guest in. I think this is exactly the kind of language that Labour jumps on to try to get its political opponents arrested and potentially prosecuted too. I'm accusing David Lammy of the deepest hypocrisy of all here. And I'm accusing Labour, which is more than happy to conduct lawfare to achieve its political objectives, of a terrible set of double standards. As far as I'm concerned, if Lucy Connolly was to be put away, and I actually don't think she ever should have been put away, but if she was put away, then this Labour Party has set the precedent in government that requires David Lammy to be investigated for a hate speech. This all comes under certain legislation we'll talk about with Nick Buckley later on. Maybe he's got a different view. Maybe you have too. But the fundamental problem is this. If you are going to start preaching about what you're allowing other people to say and not say, woe betide you if you break those terms yourself. As things stand, to the best of my knowledge, certainly when we started the broadcast live today, David Lammy has not yet been arrested or questioned by the police. But perhaps it's only a matter of time before somebody reports David Lammy under the Public Order Act 1986, Section 4 or 5. I'm being very specific about that because we checked it. And if they do, then David Lammy could be in for a rather short, sharp shock, having violated similar in principle problems with the law that brought Lucy Connolly down and caused her to be a martyr in many people's views for free speech. So that's the overview. Who can we speak to on a Wednesday? There's a clue there. Who do we always speak to on a Wednesday? It's Nick Buckley, MBE. Nick, good to see you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And how are you?
Better than average. To the best of my knowledge, neither of us were around when Hitler Youth was. But nor was...
I don't think so.
No, that was 80 years ago now. I think even Joe Biden was a baby then, and Nigel Farage wasn't even alive. But this is the crazy thing. Our wonderful Deputy Prime Minister has accused Nigel Farage of being involved with Hitler Youth. What do you make of this?
First of all, we all know David Lammy is an arse. He's not very bright, and if he is bright, he does a really good job of hiding it. It's always the hypocrisy that gets us. I mean, David Lammy should be able to say what he said. You know, it was crass, it's not true, it's stupid, but he should be able to say it. But that's not the issue. The issue is twofold for me. The first thing is Labour are always going on about we need a much softer, gentler politics because politicians are in danger, and this sort of rhetoric, you know, poisons the well, and we can't get any. And they've got a point with that, but they're normally the nastiest, and the first people who come out with the nastiest comments are the Labour Party and the people on the left. Now, the second part of what he said was a month ago, Charlie Kirk in America got assassinated for being a Nazi. When you're telling the mentally ill on the far left in this country that not only is Nigel Farage going to be the next Prime Minister and we're all afraid of him, and not only is he a right-winger, and not only is he a Thatcherite, not only is he a Nazi, but he also was part of Hitler Youth. And then when Nigel Farage is going to be stabbed in the heart or shot in the head, and we wonder why that happened, is because of statements like this.
That's exactly my issue. And we did do some research here at Unprecedented TV. And I want to get this exactly right, and we'll have a look at it in just a moment. But my understanding is that the problem arises. I'll look at it now, actually. If we just get the information, yeah, this is what it says. Apparently, the Public Order Act 1986, Section 4A states that you violated it if you use abusive or insulting words causing another person harassment, alarm, or distress. It seems pretty obvious that when David Lammy says he wants the public to come to their own judgments about someone who once flirted with Hitler Youth, he's doing exactly that. In fact, let's actually hear what he said.
Is Nigel Farage a racist?
I answered your question. I'm not going to play the man. I'm playing the ball as our leader did. I will leave it for the public to come to their own judgments about someone who once flirted with Hitler Youth when he was younger. That is...
Well, there we go. It's quite unequivocal. That was from the BBC. Absolutely, totally clear. He said about Nigel Farage, I will leave it to the public to judge someone who flirted with Hitler Youth when he was younger. Now, it's a lie for a start, as far as I understand it. But that seems to be, and back to this point again, right, abusive or insulting words causing another person harassment, alarm, or distress.
But those sort of things don't apply to politicians. And it definitely don't apply to left-wing politicians. It definitely doesn't apply to politicians in government. So David Lammy has got 4 layers of protection there. Plus he's black, 5th layer. Plus he is mentally retarded, 6th layer.
Well, you can't say that. I don't think we can say he's mentally retarded.
Oh, well, no. He's mentally retarded.
No, I just don't think we can say that. I don't think he is. I don't think he's bright. I don't think he's mentally retarded. I don't think that's right. I literally do. I just disagree with you. I think that he just isn't smart enough for his job.
I don't mean mentally retarded as in he is technically, medically, mentally retarded. I'm meaning it purely as an insult.
Okay, well, I'd rather you didn't use that insult, to be honest with you. Now, you might say I'm censoring you, but it's difficult because that phrase itself is loaded, and I don't want to cause offence for people who actually who just genuinely might think that it's unacceptable. Am I being censorious? I don't really know. I just feel bad about it myself. Let me put it this way: the way I would describe David Lammy, and I've said this before, Nick, I just don't think he's got the intelligence or the education to do a good job at the level that he's at. In fact, that's a criticism I level at a lot of modern politicians. They don't have the experience or the intelligence or the education. I certainly think that Keir Starmer isn't bright enough to do his job, but I'd say that's something slightly different. Now, as I say, I'm not jumping down your throat, but I just want to be very forensic, especially considering we are criticizing David Lammy for the lines he's using. Whatever the reasons for him doing it in terms of his personal intellectual capabilities, my feeling is that he's just basically done that thing that you said earlier, which I totally agree with, that he's basically violated a fundamental principle here, which is being fair-minded about other people and not thinking about the consequences of what he said.
I don't think it's that. I just think it's the pure hypocrisy of the man. Politicians have always had a go at each other. They've always been underhand against each other. That's part of politics. What in this case is the fact that David Lammy would be the first one to criticize someone else for saying something like that about someone in his party. He would be jumping down there, thought this is dangerous, this is rude, this is, you can't say. He'd be the first to say those things, but it's okay for him to do it against someone else.
Yeah. Well, he's as I said, I don't want us to be ending up with all kinds of problems ourselves. That's the only reason I was so fast about that phrase, because it is tremendously loaded. Also, I've got a major issue about something that Lauren Edwards, I will be following it up with, her said about some of my Estonian countrymen. Let's look at David Lammy again. Here's something else he said.
Get it, of course, is Nigel Farage. He wraps himself in our flag, but his policies don't match British values. We must call his scheme to round up and deport our French, our Indian, our Caribbean neighbours who already have indefinite leave to remain what it is. It is racist.
We see now, this is the next problem I've got. I know Nigel Farage very well. He's not racist. Now, I think that's slander.
Well, there's 1,000,004 different definitions of the word racist. So according to the left, Lammy is perfectly correct there. So according to the left's definition of racism, Nigel Farage, me and you are probably all racist. So it all depends on the definition. The left has spent the last 30 years changing every definition of every important word. So when we argue with each other, if me and David Lammy now were having a debate over racism, we would be talking past each other and over each other because we wouldn't be debating the same topic. We may have called it the debate End Racism, but his definition is completely different to my definition. They've just changed the word, the meaning of the words.
I think that racism is when you genuinely consider somebody from a different ethnic background to necessarily be worse than you, whatever that means, simply because you come from that ethnic background. And it's quite obvious to me Nigel Farage is not that person. Nigel Farage, in fact, has taken great umbrage by what's been said about him, not just by David Lammy, but we'll come on to Keir Starmer in a minute. Putting all this together, though, the issue I've got is the same one that Nigel Farage has, that using language like that could actually evoke a practical response, as you said, from people who are mentally ill, who literally might think that somehow, despite the impossibility of it, that Nigel Farage was involved with Hitler Youth or something like that.
Many people would say, if I could go back in time and kill Hitler as a baby, I would, because it would save 100 million lives. And I can understand that way of thinking. Now, roll it onto today, and we're telling the far left, Nigel Farage is going to be the new Hitler. What you do with Hitlers, you kill them, because it's the best thing for humanity. That's what we've been told for 70, 80 years. So this is a call for Nigel Farage to be assassinated. It really, really is.
Yeah, and that's what worries me so much about it. Now, he was later on forced into a retraction, but this retraction came a little bit late, and he didn't do it very happily. Lammy backtracks on Farage Hitler Youth claim, but there he is with a British flag. It just beggars belief that they're all trying to catch up with. They're all trying to catch up with Nigel Farage by waving these flags around. But back to this point about Lucy Connolly. Lucy Connolly put 30 words on the internet. They were pretty provocative, I would say. She admits it herself, but then she took them off. 4 hours later, she removed them. And as far as I know, there's no evidence of her actually having caused anybody to caused anybody to actually attack someone. But as you've described correctly, the great concern here is people of limited capability or just full of hate will do what this woman, Lucy Connolly, didn't create, which is an actual violent act. And this is the thing. Lucy Connolly, I watched her make a very impressive speech, indeed, at the Reform UK conference. And she is quite circumspect about it. She doesn't deny that what she said was wrong, but she certainly thinks that what happened to her was disproportionate. Now, I'm willing to bet that she'll have something to say about what David Lammy said, but that's less important to me than the fact that Labour itself was perfectly happy to see Lucy Connolly behind bars for over a year for hurty words on the internet, which she herself took down 4 hours later. And it's very difficult, therefore, for me to understand why David Lammy should not be the subject of a similar investigation, Nick.
That's because we have a two-tier justice system. The big mistake from Lucy was pleading guilty, because she took legal advice, and the whole legal profession had pressure put on them from above saying, we want all these people locked up and punished ASAP to stop the riots. So she was advised, please plead guilty, and you'll probably get a slap on the wrist, and and that'll be the end of it. So she took advice, pleaded guilty, and got 3 years in jail and served the 1. So it's a bit hard to compare sometimes with someone who's not been arrested, but someone who's pleaded guilty. She never should have pleaded guilty. That's no excuse, even if she had, and she did plead guilty. Even if what she said was horrendous, and what she said wasn't horrendous, she just says, I don't care. I don't care if people die. I don't care. That's basically my philosophy for the rest of the world, because there's nothing I can do about the wars around the world. So therefore, I don't care, because there's nothing I can do. It
was a bit stronger than that, but the interesting point is, as you say, she was advised to plead guilty. My problem is here. My fundamental problem here is consistency. If Labour wants to play lawfare games with the British public, they have to expect the British public to play lawfare games with them. That's really the fundamental point I'm making here, Nick. And for David Lammy to say things which genuinely could provoke some kind of a dangerous response towards not just Nigel Farage, but people in the Reform UK and senior figures there, that's what bothers me. Now, Keir Starmer has tried to nuance what he said. But let's first see what Keir Starmer, actually did say. Now, this comes from the conference. Starmer seems absolutely obsessed with Nigel Farage. Listen to this.
When was the last time that you heard Nigel Farage say anything positive about Britain's future? He can't. He doesn't like Britain, doesn't believe in Britain, wants you to doubt it just as much as he does. So he resorts to grievance. They all do. They want to turn this country, this proud, self-reliant country, into a competition of victims, saying to you, to working people, don't trust in each other. You can't fix this. This is not a great country. But it is conference.
And once again, that's just a lie. What Keir Starmer says there is completely untrue. Anybody who's listened to Nigel Farage on in a speech, making a speech, will know that. But even more fundamentally, Nick, anybody who knows him personally knows that Nigel Farage had kind of left politics. But he was so disappointed by the fact that the things he'd set in motion, such as getting Brexit done, hadn't been done, that he's rather reluctantly come back in. So I'm stunned that this man in the picture there has got away with this so far. He's been challenged on saying that Reform UK has racist policies, and he tries to nuance this. So I say, I'm not saying that Reform UK members and voters are racist. Well, yes. Who's the racist person who's making the racist policies then, Starmer?
That's a great example from Starmer of projection, because everything he's saying there is what I believe the Labour Party stand for. The Labour Party are the one for decades now dividing us up into groups of victims against each other. Labour Party are the ones who seem to hate this country, who seem to be destroying it with net zero, with giving away our territories, with always wanting to join multinational global organisations because they don't think we can run ourselves properly. Everything he said there was projection.
Yeah, it's interesting. My feeling is it was projection in the following way. I'd use the same word, actually, Nick. Because they've made such a total mess of their first year, they're looking to blame everyone except themselves. They're still blaming the Conservatives for the economic woes of the country. And now, instead of admitting that Labour has completely broken just about every economic promise that it's made to the country, they're saying, oh, well, if you think we're bad, take a look at Reform UK.
Yeah, they are. And I think all this is backfiring on them. I think the Labour Party conference up to now has been fantastic PR for Reform UK, because the more Labour go on about Reform UK, call them racist, call their supporters racist, call their leader Hitler, supports Hitler Youth, the more they do that, the more the people who are sat on the fence, because don't forget, everyone in that hall will never ever vote for Reform UK. They'll always vote Labour. There's a big section of people who will always vote Reform UK, no matter what happens to Reform. But a third of people are in the middle. And every time they're hearing these attacks on them, on Reform, but also the fact that if you want mass deportation, if you want your country back, if you're sick of being flooded by third world immigrants, you're a racist. You're part of Hitler Youth. We actually want you to be assassinated. You know, that's the subheading. Those people are going to be flocking to Reform UK. I don't think Labour realise how much damage they're doing to themselves, all because they're trying to keep the party together.
I'll come back to that in just a minute. Before we go further, incidentally, one of the most popular shows here, Lib and Let Die, which is play on words, with myself and Mark Oaten, a former Liberal Democrat MP. There'll be another episode of that coming out pretty soon. Yeah, that's the good old days, Nick, when myself and Mark Oaten was still somebodies in Parliament. And I do think that we've lost a lot, not just because we're not in Parliament anymore, but I think we've lost a lot of the decorum and actually the collective intelligence. Now that we've got career politicians who've never done anything else, no one on the cabinet's ever run a business. We've got all these problems. But returning to the core issue here, it seems to me that this relentless verbal attack on Nigel Farage is understandably annoying him and probably upsetting him, because it does begin to make Reform UK look like a target. Now, I think this is completely against the rules of engagement in politics. And give you another example here, and this is more about the Prime Minister than the Deputy Prime Minister. Keir Starmer, in the run-up to his conference, he kept saying that Reform is the enemy. Now, I loathe that kind of language in politics, because you attack enemies. I think that Nigel Farage is the competition. And that's what politics in Britain in a peace-loving country should be. And when you start using language like enemy, it's a little bit like what you said before, Nick. You're beginning to use very emotive language because Russia, according to Starmer, is the enemy. And the Germans in World War II would be the enemy. Nigel Farage is neither. And now add those two things together. The fact that we fought the enemy, which was Germany in the 40s, and then idiotically, in my view, the underperforming David Lammy calls Nigel Farage out as something to do with Hitler Youth. Then the pattern you're describing begins to look quite ominous, because what happened to Germany wasn't exactly nice. And that's what worries me more than anything. You don't have to be a supporter of Reform UK to be very concerned if there are practical consequences to its supporters and leaders.
Politics has always been a nasty business. Go back hundreds of years, some of the speeches in Parliament, what they called each other, it's always been like that. And it probably should be like that. The calls for a pink and fluffy Parliament where we don't say anything that upsets the opposition, we're never going to get that. But there is a line, and the line that David Lammy crossed wasn't calling Farage the enemy because he is their enemy. I get that. It was linking him to a real enemy that we had a war against. That was crossing the line. I mean, if you add the two things together, the fact they're using enemy language and then this ridiculous slur about Hitler Youth, that's the problem I've got. The Prime Minister says that Farage is the enemy. The Deputy Prime Minister suggests that Farage has been flirting with Hitler Youth, even though it's chronologically impossible. It's that accumulation effect. So so I understand why politicians say the things they do, but there is lines there. There's lines, and it's a little bit like when Angela Rayner called the Tories scum. You know, that crossed a line, and him linking Farage to Hitler Youth crossed a line. But everything before that, I think, is perfectly acceptable, and we need to understand that if people act upon your words and your insults, that isn't necessarily your fault unless you've incited violence. Now, we should be aware of what we're saying, and we should be aware of the mentally ill people who may get a gun or a knife or a bomb and do something. And we must be aware, are we contributing to that? But some of these conversations are very difficult because they do stifle free speech, because I could then say to you, you can't, well, that's how we get to hate speech laws, because what you're saying could lead to a genocide down the line. So it's difficult. But connecting someone to Hitler Youth that didn't exist after 1945 is just a step too far.
Yeah. Now, I jumped in very quickly earlier on with the description you're giving David Lammy. Now, I'm wondering, am I doing that because we are now living in a self-censorious environment? Now, two people who've been talking quite a lot about that, interestingly enough, are Nigel Farage and, of course, Donald Trump. They're pretty good friends. And in both cases, they have been concerned about the erosion of free speech, especially Donald Trump. J.D. Vance launched quite a specific salvo against the United Kingdom not that long ago at I think, a NATO summit of some sort. And interestingly enough, he came over here and spent time with David Lammy. But the two people in the picture there, certainly in the case of Donald Trump, they really do understand what free speech means. What I'm worried about is this schism which is forming. Now, Lucy Connolly is interesting. I mentioned her before. And what she would probably say is, well, David Lammy shouldn't have said it. It was stupid. But unless it actually leads to violence, he shouldn't really go to prison for it. That's what she said about Ricky Jones, the ridiculously offensive Labour councillor who talked about slitting the throats of right-wingers he didn't like. So what Lucy Connolly would say is probably of David Lammy, it's stupid. but unless it leads to violence, nothing should really happen to him. But
And I completely agree with her.
Yeah.
I didn't think Ricky Jones should have been arrested. What he said was uncouth. He didn't mean it. I know he didn't mean it. And nobody would take what he said as a direction to go slit someone's throat. Just like David Lammy shouldn't be arrested for what he said. It's stupid, but he's a stupid man. And it is contributing to a environment where right wingers could be assassinated, but that's not his aim. I'm 100% sure that's not his aim. He's not trying to do that. If we have free speech, we have to live with the consequences of free speech, and that's hearing words you don't like. It's hearing words other people don't like. It's hearing things and sayings that we go, oh, that's crossed the line. That's outrageous. Free speech isn't about hearing the things we enjoy. It's about hearing the things people we don't like say things we don't like. Because if they don't have free speech, none of us have free speech.
Yeah, and I'm actually aligned with you on that to a very enthusiastic degree. Here's how I see it. I came into politics actually because of freedom issues, not so much economics. I think that most governments screw up their economic policies, not just the Labour Party, but all governments, I think, are pretty bad at it. But I came in because I could see our free speech being limited. And my personal opinion is the same as yours. I'm pretty active on X. Follow me on X, please, if you're not doing it already. And also remember to subscribe to Unprecedented TV, YouTube. I have to say that. I'm told to say that all the time, Nick. So thanks for the indulgence there. My position is as follows. The people who say really offensive things about me and to me in X, I'm not going to sue them. Very unlikely I would, because I understand those are the rules of engagement. Those are the terms of reference. Now, those people are very unlikely to say them to my face, but they can hide at their keyboard and say it. I get it. I understand. Sometimes they make very critical comments I happen to agree with, and it helps me think better about stuff. And that's one of the great things about having robust debate. Where would I stand with Lucy Connolly? No way should she have gone to prison, in my view. There's no evidence that she actually did cause any third-party harm.
Never should have been arrested.
No, well, she shouldn't have been arrested, really. I don't think she should have been arrested at all. Ricky Jones probably shouldn't have been arrested. It was more questionable because he was very explicit about his incitement. But on balance, in my world, if I was Home Secretary, I would probably have phoned him up myself if I was in the Labour Party, saying, what do you think you're doing? You're bringing the party into disrepute with your idiotic position. We are suspending you for 6 months. Why do you think about it? That's what I'd say. But if the police said, do you want us to go and arrest him, Mr. Öpik, or Home Secretary, I'd say, no, it's too much. If he keeps doing it, we may have to come back to it. But if he doesn't do it again, then we'll suspend him from the party. That's in our power. And then we'll see how he is. If he's genuinely repentant, if he kind of understands in his thick head that what he said was wrong, then we'll let him back in. And now with David Lammy, same problem. I think I agree with your definition now. He's a comparatively unintelligent man for the job he's doing. We see this time and time again. His mastermind performance wasn't masterful, for example.
Can you name a famous blue cheese? Red Leicester.
Yeah, Red Leicester, yeah. So he's not blessed with genius as far as I can tell. Either that or he hides it very well, which in itself isn't a crime. And actually what he said about Nigel Farage, it's skirting around the danger zone. Because if there is third-party harm, that's the point where we need to revisit it. It's too late then, of course. That's the point. Is it that David Lammy has opened a danger to Farage and others? That's really the only question I've got here. If not, if the public's smart enough to realize that Lammy isn't smart, then okay, he exercises free speech in a completely self-harming way because he just looks even more idiotic than he did before he said it. And this is the problem. So let me ask you this question, Nick. Where do you draw the line? Because if somebody in the Reform is attacked and they say, well, it's because of what David Lammy said about Hitler Youth, what happens then?
Even at that point, David Lammy is not to be held responsible for that. David Lammy cannot be held responsible for what a third party does listening to what he says, unless David Lammy is specifically saying, go get a gun, go on a big high tower, and when Farage comes round the corner to get on the stage, shooting him in the head. That's the only time we should be prosecuted for what we've said in that sort of scenario. David Lammy is not responsible for what people do when they listen to what he has to say. Now, David Lammy, as a politician and as a decent human being, he has a responsibility to himself to ensure what he says helps to deliver a nicer, better, safer society. Now, he has that responsibility only to himself, not to any nutcase who can take his words and then do something evil.
You know, you've got something in common with the late Reverend Ian Paisley. He would have taken the same position. He said that he was not responsible if other people acted irresponsibly on the basis of his words. And I found that really interesting. I was honored to know him, actually. And for another time, we'll talk about him. But let's get to the heart of it. What you're saying, therefore, is that David Lammy has exposed himself as an unintelligent man. Let's use that word so I don't go crazy and don't get screaming in my ears from the gallery. But he's an unintelligent man. And what he's really done is just further damage his own credibility, backtracking on the Farage Hitler Youth claim. And
it's more than just being unintelligent. He's also not a very nice person.
Yeah, I don't know him well enough to comment, but if you add it all together...
If you are comparing your political opponents from Parliament and you're comparing them to what we would universally agree were the most evil people ever to exist on earth, the Nazis, that's universally accepted, they're the go-to for the most evil people in the world. If you're comparing your opponents to them, then you're not a very nice person, are you?
Well, this may seem pedantic. I would say he doesn't do very nice things. Somebody once said to me, just because you've got a past doesn't mean you can't have a future. In fact, that was David Trimble who said that of his opponents and people actually who had been committing terrorist acts. Where we go from here is maybe to recognize one last thing, that Keir Starmer is leading a rather miserable cabinet. He says that completely wrongly that Nigel Farage doesn't like Britain. It's ridiculous. No one can seriously think that. It's a ridiculous thing to say. And then secondly, you've got his deputy prime minister making unsubstantiated, ridiculous claims, which are chronologically impossible, just in order to play the man, not the ball. And let's remember, it was Lammy himself who'd said about a minute earlier, they play the ball, not the man. So whatever else we see here, the greatest own goal, the ball that's been played here is Lammy and Starmer kicking the ball into their own goal.
They are, but we also need to, you've been to many political conferences. We need to understand political conferences are playing to the audience, to the gallery. They're saying all the things their supporters want them to say because they want the rounds of applause. People like Lammy are basically, I mean, this doesn't bear thinking about, but he's probably trying to position himself for the fall of Starmer. Could I be the first black Caribbean prime minister? He'll have those dreams, of course he will. So a lot of this is playing to the gallery, and it works. It works.
Well, you say that, but I just think, I think he's made so many mistakes that even in the Labour Party, they can't think of him as an asset. He's not a great speaker. He's angry. He tries to feign anger, in my view. And I was just waiting for him to screw up at the conference, and he didn't disappoint. Next up, we'll be talking about the Conservative conference. That should be interesting.
Yeah. Can I give you my last point on free speech?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
My last point is this. Free speech isn't free. We pay for free speech. We pay for it by being upset, by being hurt, by risking violence, by risking nutcases killing us. That's the price we pay for free speech. It isn't free.
That's interesting. And I think you have to be quite brave to believe in the free speech of those who don't like you. At the end of the day, the whole point of Unprecedented is to be able to have these kinds of conversations and hopefully to analyze. I would love to have David Lammy on the program. Maybe we'll ask him and giving him the chance to reply. At the end of the day, it'd be interesting to see what he has to say. He'll be treated with respect, not ridicule, if he comes on, but also he will be handled robustly. We'll ask the questions that I think need to be asked. Nick, thanks very much indeed. Always interesting to speak with you. And I also thank all those people who've been in touch, which caused me to choose this subject today. If you're watching in the archive, then you'll be able to see how David Lammy's career has progressed and how things have played out. But I like to think what we've been discussing is still highly relevant, because at the end of the day, what Nick Buckley, MBE, and myself have been talking about is the reach of free speech. And for me, I would summarize it like this. As Nick said, free speech isn't free, but perhaps the biggest psychological price you pay is listening to things that could offend you and defending the right of that person to say it. David Lammy went too far. He had to apologize. It is to be hoped that no third-party damage occurs as a result of his stupid comment. But in a free world, there has to be a degree of trust in the common sense of the viewer. I hope that you were not influenced in a negative way towards Nigel Farage by what David Lammy says, and I hope you trust yourself enough to make these decisions for yourself. If you do, then you're in the right place when it comes to getting your information and your views. And we will get more controversial people on as well. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks to Nick for coming on as well. More than anything, thanks to you for giving us some of your time. We hope it was worth it. We hope you learned something too. And do let us know if there are things that you'd like us to cover. We're always open to new ideas here at Unprecedented TV. I'm Lembit Öpik. That was Lembit Öpik Live. Have a great day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The return of the sausages.